poster art. There was this beautiful poster which circulated in the United States, the Polish Pavilion World's Fair. And as you see there, the Polish flags and also the rendering of the pavilion as it was. That is a 145-foot tower in front of it, made out of these bronze segments. It's a open construction, very beautiful. I have some photographs of it. But also, in addition to the infrastructure that was being put out there, Poland decided that Stefan de Ropp would be the commissioner for this particular pavilion. He would be the administrator. Stefan de Ropp, incidentally, and he's a pretty major player in this. His name will come up several times as I go through this presentation. He was not a Polish citizen. He was a Swiss citizen who was also very much involved in the Poznań International Trade Fair, which I believe started in the 1920s in Poznań, in my native city. So they took the best person they had and they put him in charge, and I think they made a very wise decision. To sum up, Polish Pavilion, it's an opportunity for Poland to show not only its history, but its modern achievements. Among the other things that were part of the pavilion was a separate restaurant. And this featured Polish food. As you notice there, we have some delicacies, Polish ham, cucumber soup, and so forth. It's interesting that you will see that the only Polish word on there is zakąski. And it's very varied. You have your chicken and pork and so forth, so there's a large variety. All for $1.25 for lunch. So I think this was, and also the way it was rigged is the waitresses wore Polish folk dress. So it was a very nice place. This is a rendering of the pavilion from the official program. There was, in 1938, a full year before the pavilion opened, a book was prepared that listed practically every single item that was being shown in this pavilion. The book ran for over 500 pages. It was published in English and Polish. There were two separate editions. And it listed a number of things that I will mention later as we go through this. This is a rendering from the 1930s of the Polish Pavilion. You will see that this has kind of a vaguely medieval cast to it. It's a modernistic building with sort of a medieval tower in front of it. The little pieces that you see there are shields. They're actual shields that had a kind of a gold tone to them. In front, the Poles decided to put a statue of King Jagiełło. Now, there was a, this was a last minute change actually, because I don't know if you noticed, but in that rendering that I showed earlier, the pen and ink sketch, that was actually a copy of the Kosciuszko statue from Wawel that was going to be put there first. However, because I think of the mood of the times, the Poles decided to put Jagiełło, and it was a very dramatic statue, which now you can see in Central Park, and we'll come back to that later, why it got there and so forth. But very dramatic pavilion. As a matter of fact, it received a number of prizes for architecture and the goals of the exhibit. And here's the crux. Why was Poland investing so much cash into being there? First, they wanted to show a true picture of the country, something we're still working on, as a modern European state, striving for modernity, and also to establish some trade contacts along the way. So what was shown on the exhibit? Actually, practically everything, but we can divide it up into two separate categories. One was the historical section and cultural section. There was a lot of Polish art. Among the things you'll see was there were portraits of various Polish heroes, copies of documents, important items from Polish history, and that was one half of it. The other part was the part that Poland was trying to present as itself as an industrial export nation. So you had all kinds of commodities, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, inventions, household goods, etc. There was an article published in the New York Times at the time where the author, journalist, went poetic about the things that he was seeing there. because, and I'll name a few things. One very interesting item was a light bulb that didn't use any vacuum in it. So it was something akin to a precursor of our LED lighting systems that we have now. And already in the 1930s, there were Poles trying to work out various these systems. There were various surgical apparatus that were presented there. There were items concerning the aviation industry, models of gliders. There was an airplane engine. There was a tire that was produced on the basis of using products from potatoes. Amazing. It was, and among the things that were shown, this is a photo from that program I mentioned. This actually showed kind of a historical, geographical picture of Poland, the connection between the Baltic and the Black Sea. And the various Polish industries were trying to tout their products: coal, metal, iron, meat, sugar. All the exports were being presented to people visiting through this, hopefully to get some perhaps sales orders. Among the things that were shown, essentially shows where my interests lie, were these beautiful models of steam engines, locomotives, that were produced in Poland. And one of them is a streamlined version, and the other one is a more traditional. And every valve, rivet, and bolt on these was beautifully reproduced. This is a picture of the streamlined locomotive. And of course, as I mentioned, there was, in the historical section, there were various presentations of Polish heroes. Kosciuszko and Pulaski played a major part in the American Revolution, so they were very much put forward in this presentation. The Pulaski statue was a full-sized heroic statue. The painting was by Arthur Szyk, Poland's leading caricaturist in this particular style. Also, not to be left behind, this beautiful stained glass window was presented there. A lot of people think it's the Virgin Mary. Actually, the Virgin Mary is the Matka Boska Ostrobramska above the lady. That's Polonia with a sword. And the bottom panels pay honor to the Polish armed services, especially in the recent 1920s Bolshevik War. So a very dramatic item. Now, among the historical items, the creme de la creme of this exhibit were 7 historical paintings that were created especially to show pivotal points in Polish history, also to show the kind of toleration and forward-seeing thinking of the Polish nobility and rulers at the time. And the cycle started in the year 1000 with Bolesław the Brave greeting Otto III in Gniezno. And this is the painting. I have all of these. 2 of them were reproduced in the program, and the rest of them I had to obtain pictures. But these were painted in a kind of a medieval pre-Raphaelite style. Very unique. They're 200 centimeters long and 180 centimeters high. The baptism of Lithuania. So as we go through the progression of Poland's history, the Charter of Jedynia, I don't think a lot of you are familiar with, but it was the granting of the writ of habeas corpus in Poland. The Union of Lublin, the Union of Lithuania and Poland. The Warsaw Confederation, which gave rights to non-Catholics in Poland. The Relief of Vienna, where Jan Sobieski rescued essentially Europe from the Turks. And the 3rd of the May Constitution, which was one of the crowning moments of Polish democracy. So these paintings were painted by a group of painters called the Brotherhood of St. Luke. And they met in Kazimierz Dolny. I see some smiles back there, so you might be familiar with this. But what they did is, each one of them took on a separate part of the project. One would paint the costumes, one would paint the backgrounds, one would paint the weapons, etc. And all of these folks would hide their signatures on the paintings on some little place. For example, this is from the Warsaw Confederation painting. In a corner, there's a little, like a roadstone, and there are the gentlemen that worked on this particular painting. Now, 1939 comes around. The pavilion opens in May. War breaks out in September. Mr. Dorop, the commissioner or the administrator is stuck because he has no money coming in from Poland. There's a state of war. Poland has been invaded. He can't do anything. So working through his American friends, donations, income from the restaurant, and other sources, he keeps the pavilion going through 1940 to the end of the World's Fair. Incidentally, he also organizes there an exhibition of photographs from Poland being attacked. So he tries to promote the Polish cause in the United States before America joins the fight against the Nazis. This is a very important thing that happened here. I really praise him very highly because he had to really go out of his way to do this. Now, he has to do something with the objects on hand. Essentially, he auctions some of them off. The beautiful tower you saw in front of the pavilion is sold off for scrap. He gets a lot of money for that, by the way. The statue of Jagiełło is placed in Central Park, where you can still admire it. It was recently renovated. And these beautiful models, a lot of these items wind up in the Polish Museum of America in Chicago. Unfortunately, they're not displayed in a kind of a great way, but they survived. And you have the locomotives you saw in the previous photographs there. So these beautiful items, they're kind of worse for wear now, like they went through the war, but they are still there, and people can look at them and admire them. Just to broaden the perspective, I threw in some other items that are there as well, which is some of the beautiful wrought iron artwork that came from Poland and was part of the pavilion. Here is Jagiełło in Central Park, looking very brave. And Pulaski, the Pulaski you saw before, he's in Wyandotte, Michigan. This statue was recently renovated as well. Things like some of the wall hangings, tapestries wound up in various places, various consulates, embassies, and the Kosciuszko Foundation got some as well. So this tapestry with the Polish coat of arms is there in one of the rooms of the Kosciuszko Foundation. These tables, there were, I think, about 17 or 18 of these tables with the eagle legs. These items, again, wound up every which where. This particular one is one of three that is in Philadelphia at the Polish Cultural Center. This one happens to be at the embassy in Washington, and that was renovated. You kind of see the difference. This one is a lot better looking eagle. There were 3 bells cast especially to be shown at this pavilion, and one of them was the Bell of the Struggles for Liberation, which wound up at the Holy Name of Jesus Parish in Stamford, Connecticut. I was very lucky. I found out that they had taken it down for cleaning, so I ran over there, and it is, I won't go into the description, but you see that it's very richly ornamented. And the priest that purchased this bell, because it went on auction, this was one of the items that Stephen Dorop was able to sell, it was purchased, and the priest described it in a booklet. He says, the whole history of Poland can be read on this bell. And precisely, you can find just about anything. On the top you have Polish saints, on the bottom you have figures from Polish history, including Piłsudski, a coat of arms of Polish cities, some of which are not in Poland anymore. And you have, he interpreted it as Queen Jadwiga being the female figure here, but it's actually Polonia. Anyway, really a terrific item. All these things were so artistic, and Poland was going all out for this particular World's Fair to show. This I mentioned 3 bells. This is a small one, the Pokolenia bell, which is in the museum in Chicago. Now, what happened to those 7 paintings I mentioned? Stefan de Ropp got himself a job with Lemoyne College in Syracuse, New York, as a lecturer in the 50s, and he was still hanging on to these 7 paintings. These were the last items to go anywhere. He decided that since it was a Jesuit Catholic college, that it would be a good place to deposit them. So they were stored for a while. Then in the 1980s, they built a new library, and this is where they're installed. The gentleman who actually was responsible for putting them into this library was Father Frank Haig. You might remember the name Haig because that's also a name of an American Secretary of State. They were brothers. And Father Frank was so enamored of these paintings that he actually took a great interest in Polish history. He traveled to Poland. He went to the Kosciuszko Foundation summer sessions at the Jagiellonian. So, but now, how are they displayed? They're really not displayed in a great way. We owe a great thanks to the college for preserving them. But first of, unfortunately, they're on the upper floor of the library behind the stacks, and the lighting isn't the best. If you were planning an exhibit of paintings, you certainly wouldn't do it the way they are displayed. They were put behind glass for security reasons, so that introduces a reflective surface. And then they were put between windows. So if you're looking at them, you notice there's lighting from above, but there are also fluorescent lights from the stack area. So you get, if you notice some of the pictures I showed before, there were these lines of light across them. So they're not being exhibited in the best way. And I had entered into a discussion, an ongoing dialogue with the college to give them some better exposure. So this is one thing we can agree on. In addition to the paintings, there were also several tapestries. This is called the Angel Tapestry, and it's also hanging in the library. Now, those of you who would like to delve more deeply into this subject, there's an excellent book by Krystyna Nowakowska. She was able to take advantage of the tremendous archive that the New York Public Library has on the World's Fair, and there's a quite goodly amount of information about the Polish Pavilion there. The book is published in 2 languages, so there's no language problem. She has some excellent photographs there. It is a kind of an overview of the whole situation. I kind of started developing, because of my interest in those paintings, I started delving much more deeply into their history. And as I mentioned, I especially made the trip to Stanford to look at that bell, and I always have an eye peeled to see where other things from the pavilion will wind up, or where I will come across them. And it's quite surprising where some of these things are. Okay, there is, as I said, you can look at the book. I have a little website where I list various articles and photographs of these paintings. Also, there's a film about the pavilion on YouTube, which is, if you put in Polish Pavilion, the one that is of interest to you is the one that runs for about 1:30 seconds. It's an 8mm film that someone just took on their own, and then eventually it wound up on YouTube. A very interesting film. And that's as much as I have to say. I'm open for questions.
Can you go back and show this address?
Yes, of course. Hang on.
Thank you. Just leave it.
Yeah, sure. Yes, please.
I was just wondering, did you notice an interesting thing? Maybe I'm a little bit crazy, but when I was looking at what you were showing as the things that were being shown at this pavilion, it really makes an interesting point about Poland and where it is today. It's as though the history when Poland lost freedom didn't happen, and Poles went back to this and picked up where they left off, which would make them about, 70 years off?
Yeah.
The way they want to talk about their country.
Mm-hmm.
I was just looking at what you were showing. These are all things that Poland wants to show now.
Yeah, one thing I need to point out, one thing that occurred to me early on is that this is kind of lost history, because when I traveled to Poland and I spoke about this particular exhibit, nobody knew anything about it. It was the Polish people's government really didn't want to have anything to do with this. As a matter of fact, that was one of the problems that de Ropp had. I think he would have wanted those paintings to return to Poland, at least from the various letters and descriptions and things I've been reading. It seemed to me like he was very hesitant about selling these paintings off. That's why he claimed them as his back salary and donated them to the college. That was kind of iffy, but okay. He had really very few options left to him. He wasn't being paid by the Polish government, that's for sure. And he wanted to preserve them, and he didn't want to split them because in some of this history, there's mentioned that there were some collectors interested in pieces, but not in the whole set of these paintings. So, but you're right. It's like there was this disconnect. We had this part. Incidentally, one thing I also want to mention is this 1939 World's Fair. It took like 50 years before Poland again took part in a World's Fair. It had to be after the people's government for them to go onto the world stage again, like that. So it's kind of, it makes sense for what you're saying. Yes, your observation is quite correct. Yes, please.
What happened to the people that were employed at these Polish Pavilion? Did they wind up with working with the London government in exile?
Yes, they did. As a matter of fact, just to Stephen de Ropp worked for a during the war, he worked for this Polish information agency. Of course, when the war ended, the Polish government in London lost recognition. He was pretty much on his own, so he had to do whatever he could. That's why he went and got a job with Le Moyne College. Some of the artists that were listed on that painting, actually it was, I can't think of the first name, but Mr. Cibis stayed in the States and founded a porcelain company that worked out, they made fine porcelain figures, that these figures were actually so good. It was a process that he himself invented. And they were so good that the American State Department would often purchase these figurines and give them as gifts to foreign states. Because he made a whole series. He made like American Indians and animals and cowboys and you name it. These were advertised in the best magazines, by the way, like the Smithsonian, Vogue, and other high-priced markets. So he, unfortunately, the company lasted even after his death, but eventually it kind of ran out of steam. But that was one of the people that came. Yes, a number of them wound up staying. Some of the other artists stayed too in the States because they really couldn't go back. Any other questions? In that case, thank you very much. Thank you for letting me take